Have you ever wanted to turn your art into a physical object that you can hold in your hands? If you're like me and you create a lot of your art digitally, this video is going to be for you. I'm going to walk you through the entire process of creating this toy, from the designing, the 3D printing, painting, and full assembly. So by the end of this video, you will see the full reveal of the finished toy, and I'll go ahead and share some of my biggest takeaways throughout the process. All right, let's dive into it. The first step in making this toy was designing the model in Blender. I had a clear idea in mind for a stylized character in a medium poly style. Simple shapes with enough detail to give him a clear silhouette. I didn't want this character to feel too smooth, so I decided not to sculpt him and instead used very blocky shapes. This is actually the third iteration of this character, as I've scrapped the previous designs a few times. I'm currently working on an animation series with this character. You can check out a sneak peek of some of the scenes in different styles here. Okay, let's bring our character to life. This isn't a modeling tutorial, so I'm going to assume you have your character already modeled. I do want to mention two things here. Firstly, posing your character is going to help a lot with making him feel dynamic. The first version of the print that I created had the character's arms outstretched in a T pose, which was cool, but it made him feel a bit static. Plus, it took up a lot of space on my desk. I've decided that I'm going to use this idle pose for the character. Secondly, in the prototype that I made, I didn't create holes in any of the body parts and tried to just glue two flat surfaces together. Not only did this look ugly, but it also made the print very fragile. This time around, we're going to add some supports that allow the body parts to click into each other, much like a Lego. We'll place them in sections of the character that won't be seen when assembled, such as the torso, legs, shoes, and head. If you're using Blender, just duplicating the connecting parts is good enough, and you can go ahead and use a Boolean modifier to create fittings for each of the body parts. Okay, now that everything looks correct, let's export this as an STL file and move on to slicing. So to slice up our model, I'm going to be using a software called Chitubox. This software converts the model into layers that the 3D printer can understand. I adjusted the supports using the auto generate tool and made sure all the overhanging parts were supported. Any islands, which are basically just floating pieces of your model, will be highlighted in the software. So just go ahead and make sure you add some extra supports to make sure that the print doesn't fail. Please be aware that larger supports will leave small dents on your finished print, which is going to require more sanding to smooth out the imperfections later. Also, the positioning of the parts on the slicer does matter, so laying the model flat or angling it can affect print success and speed. Okay, time to print. I used the Elegoo Saturn IV with water washable resin made by Anycubic, which makes cleaning much easier as a beginner. Since this is a resin printer, I poured the resin into the basin and then I selected the slice file by plugging in a USB drive directly into my printer, and then I just hit print. For reference, the print time was around 4.5 hours for this character. I also did have quite a few failed prints along the way. I think this is the 5th print that I've done of this character. One of the big problems I had was trying to print my character too small, which ended up causing some printing errors and made it almost impossible to cleanly separate each part from the supports. I just adjusted the support density and repositioned the parts in the slicer, and I also increased the size of each body part, and that gave me a successful print. Once the printing was done, I washed it with water and gave it some time in the sun. The pros use a UV curing station, but I don't own one currently. A few days in the sun seemed to do the trick. Since the resin print had some imperfections, I made sure to sand each part before painting. I'm pretty new to painting, so I watched a bunch of tutorials and decided against airbrushing. It just seemed a little too messy. I opted for some acrylic paints from my local craft store. I first sprayed some plastic primer onto each body part as a base coat, and then I masked off any important areas for details. Since this is a pretty simple print, I didn't really need to use too much tape, but in the future, I like to experiment with liquid masking for more precision. If you're looking for the right paint to use, I've seen this brand being used and I like the results. I'd highly recommend using this brand over the paints that I'm using in this video. I basically just mixed colors on the fly, trying to match the clothing colors I had originally designed in Blender. The process was actually pretty simple. I just used normal brushes, and 2 to 3 coats of paint gave me great results. Once the paint had dried, I assembled the body parts together and used some hot glue for some extra stability. And here it is, my first completed custom art toy. It's far from perfect, but I learned so much along the way, and as a creative who spends a lot of time creating work digitally, this project was a breath of fresh air. If you found this helpful, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more similar content. And if you have any questions about 3D printing or Blender, go ahead and drop them in the comments below. I'll be sure to answer them when I can. See you in the next one.